You're heading to that place, like it or not." He lingered near the dining room window, arms folded tight, as though expecting me to crumble into sobs or fall to my knees begging. Yet I stayed put. I didn't budge or utter a sound. I simply observed him. In my mind, I questioned if this really was the boy I'd brought up, the very one I'd fed with sore, gentle breasts, the child who'd huddled against my robe during night terrors. How could kin grow so icy? I held my tongue, not from a shortage of phrases, but because speaking would unleash my deepest essence. He let out a mocking huff, irked by my quiet, and declared he couldn't keep footing my expenses, that I was messing up his routine, that his spouse was worn out, that nobody deserved this kind of existence, as if I were nothing but a weight, a lingering debt, a dusty crate jamming the lounge. He laid it all out evenly, without a shout, in that steady tone that stings deeper than any yell. My only thought was, what wrong did I commit to earn this? But he, like others, can't grasp the secrets a mom locks away. I drifted to the kitchen like all was fine. I heated water and steeped a pot of coffee. My fingers trembled, not out of terror, but from the sheer effort to hold back tears. I settled at the table and took a gradual swallow from my cup. From the adjacent space, I caught his tone on the line with somebody. He mentioned the care home had a spot free, that he'd managed the details, that it'd wrap up within 48 hours. 48 hours. That's my apparent value. Just 48 hours to shove me aside. I gripped the cup's edge hard. Memories of the decades flooded back. Everyone. The joyful stretches, the rough patches, the moments I skipped meals so he could have full ones, the evenings I kept vigil over his wheezing lungs, his anxieties, his inner demons. Every bit of it. All I'd been and offered now boiled down to a choice, bypassing my input. I'd sensed this moment approaching, not precisely in this form, not with those exact barbs, but through Marcus's gaze over recent months, like my mere presence grated on him with each breath. I'd spotted it at dinners with scant chatter, in the swift slam of his door as I walked by, in his wife's demeanor toward me, like a visitor whose welcome had expired. But those specific words, they struck the killing blow. By the time he re-entered the kitchen, I'd drained my brew. In a soft murmur, I inquired if he'd like me to fix supper. He seemed puzzled. Perhaps he'd braced for another outburst. Perhaps he'd craved the sight of me groveling, wailing, imploring. But I was no longer that figure. I skipped preparing anything for him. I retreated to my chamber, shut the door with care, perched on the mattress, and in that instant, as evening deepened into night, I resolved that if choices about my path were to be made, I'd be the one calling the shots. Marcus remains clueless about my true self, my past, or the price I paid to reach this point. He conveniently overlooks my existence prior to motherhood, that I didn't emerge fragile or exhausted, that I'd once harbored ambitions, twirled in downpours, adored fiercely, mended a shattered spirit, rebuilt from scratch, and erected all he now aims to strip. He ignores that this home isn't his claim. I constructed it personally. For 3 decades, I oversaw a neighborhood bakery, punching the clock 6 days weekly to fund each stone, each glass panel, each bloom in the garden. I grabbed just 4 hours of rest per night. I sought no favors, not even gratitude, yet memory conveniently fades when it suits. Sleep evaded me that evening. I stared upward at the plaster, replaying life's minutiae. The initial glimpse of this plot, bare earth laced with dreams. The afternoon I carried infant Marcus inside, swaddled in yellow fabric. The holidays, the chuckles, the quarrels, the reconciliations, all etched into these rooms. And now he plotted to warehouse me in some facility like a convict. I refrained from weeping, not because the pain was absent, but because I refused to hand him my sorrow. Come dawn, I rose ahead of the household. I whipped up the morning meal routinely. Marcus descended with his typical demeanor, a blend of rush and detachment. He mentioned needing to dash out for documents and that we'd discuss things soon. I gave a nod. Once he departed, I approached the wardrobe. not to gather outfits. Not quite. I reached for another item, a compact ebony wooden case I'd safeguarded for ages. It held my vital papers, titles, my testament, and modest nest eggs no one suspected. Not a fortune, but sufficient. Plus notes, snapshots, faded news bits. I positioned myself on the bed, case cradled, and after ages, a grin crossed my face. He views me as feeble. He believes he holds sway over my fate, unaware of the trials I've weathered and the resolve I possess. I sealed the case once more. I returned it. Composure and cunning were key. No revealing cards prematurely, but the contest was underway, and now I'd guide the plays. That evening, I feigned exhaustion and retired to my bedroom ahead of schedule. Lying there, I eavesdropped on Marcus conversing with his spouse. They praised the property, mentioning its lovely garden and meticulous upkeep, sounding like they were appraising a luxury getaway, treating a parent as nothing more than an ornament to store away. I tugged the covers high over my chin, not against the chill, but to shield myself from their disdain. The thought of departure no longer stung. What ached was their presumption that they could make the call without involving me, though they'd learn otherwise before long. The coming week would alter it all, and this time I'd hold the deciding voice. I recall precisely the day Marcus entered the world. It seemed the heavens sensed a pivotal moment unfolding. The physician remarked that he drew in a full breath right from the start, his initial wail claiming the entire universe as his own. And I, in my naive enthusiasm as a new parent, interpreted it as a sign of resilience, of vitality. I never suspected it carried a cautionary note as well. Even as a young boy, Marcus proved insistent, the sort who whimpered not from need but from fleeting desires, who rejected what was offered and coveted what belonged elsewhere. Yet I, driven by the unseeing devotion of a debut mother, bent over backward to indulge him. I logged additional shifts at my tailoring shop to afford those trendy athletic shoes every kid on the block coveted. I accrued debts for his enrollment in an elite school, convinced it would steer him clear of vices and negative peers. I stifled my sobs and endured restless evenings, all to propel him forward. When his father, my late husband Robert, died, Marcus had just turned 15. The loss struck us both deeply. But the sharpest pain for me wasn't the mourning itself. It was how Marcus started regarding me as utterly clueless, as if, with his deepening tone and widening frame, he had assumed the role of household head, reducing me to a mere echo of his requirements. "Stop weeping so profusely, Mom. Everyone has to go somehow," he said one evening as I clung to Robert's cushion. After that, everything shifted. He stopped seeking my input on matters. He ventured out without a word of his plans. He addressed me like I was his domestic help, his liability, his irritation. Still, I found ways to excuse it. "It's just teenage turmoil," I told myself. "He's grieving his dad's passing." So I continued cooking his preferred meals. I kept laundering his garments. I held on to the wish that someday he'd embrace me once more, the way he did in his youth. But that embrace never returned. Time marched on. Marcus matured, rose to become a thriving corporate leader, secured a solid position in the urban center, and relocated. I remained in this home we'd constructed through relentless effort, stone by stone, back when Robert was with us. Each nook harbors a tale, a recollection, a wound. I figured that once Marcus settled into his achievements, he'd return, not to reside, but to drop by, to savor a mug of brew together, to inquire about my well-being. Yet the phone calls grew infrequent. The texts vanished entirely. And on rare visits, he'd rush through. He'd scarcely greet me, glance at his timepiece, and depart. But the deepest wound wasn't his aloofness. It was the appraising way he scanned the space, like an outsider already calculating his eventual inheritance after the proprietor's passing. One afternoon, out of the blue, he announced, "Mom, it's time to consider putting this property on the market. The structure's aging and you can't manage it alone anymore." He delivered the words without meeting my gaze. As if the blow didn't faze him, as if he ignored that this dwelling represented my final link to Robert, to our shared past, to who I am. I stayed silent, simply inclining my head and refilling his cup. From then on, the insistence mounted. Weekly rings. "Mom, have you visited the lawyer yet?" "Mom, an acquaintance of mine is eyeing property deals." "Mom, this isn't about feelings. It's what's best for you." Each call left me feeling a fragment of myself tearing loose, like a bloom torn from its root. I gripped tightly to my daily habits, tending my greenery, mending fabrics, strolling the local streets. But his hunger for more loomed over every room. Whenever I rifled through a cabinet, it felt like I was readying myself to fade away. That changed one afternoon as I tended the floral shrubs. I spotted him pulling up, his sleek vehicle, his business attire, his costly scent, and his stern expression. "I've consulted with lawyer Sterling already. Mom, if you refuse to endorse the documents, I'll have to pursue alternative steps. This property will be mine regardless of your wishes." In that moment, something shattered, not within me, but in him. For as he uttered those words, I shed no tears. I showed no distress. I merely observed him. And in that quiet, I believe he truly grasped, for the first time, that his sway over me had evaporated, that the vulnerability he once exploited was gone. That night, I barricaded myself in my chamber. I retrieved the account book where I documented every outlay since Robert's departure. What sum had gone toward Marcus's schooling? What investments had I poured into the residence? How often had I forsaken purchases for my own sake to provide for him? To him. Each statistic felt like a stab, every digit a deep cut of disloyalty. And in that dim dawn light, a painful truth hit me harder than all the rest. My boy didn't care for me anymore. He only wanted me gone so he could claim his share. That's when I resolved it. I wouldn't hand over a single thing, not a single brick, not a single seat, not even a simple planter. Come morning, I headed to the bazaar. I strolled the familiar paths like before, yet now with a sharper gaze, as though each footfall sparked the start of some hidden strategy unfolding. There was Ms. Evelyn Reed, the former notary who'd stepped away from the job. I said hello and inquired, "Do you still handle wills and such?" She eyed me first with astonishment, then with admiration for you, Thelma. Naturally, I do, and so my preparations kicked off. I collected papers, land records, and bills of payment. I dug up files, contracts, including that faded note from Robert declaring the home forever mine, no strings attached. Time slipped by. Marcus stayed silent on the line. Fine by me. I held my tongue too, since quiet can sometimes be the boldest stand of all. A month on, he showed up again, all haughty and pressing. "Mom, I've sorted it out for you. Off to the home you go. Like it or lump it." Right then, it clicked. This went beyond greed. It was pure disdain. The breaking point. That evening, I returned with a lump in my throat, like I'd gulped down a stone that stuck fast. The atmosphere hung heavy, nothing fresh, but thicker now, more blatant, like mist that quit pretending to be subtle. It was the scorn, Marcus's scorn, aimed at me from my own child. I sensed it in the dishes he abandoned on the counter, unwashed, in how his pitch sharpened whenever he addressed me, in his refusal to meet my eyes, treating me like just another piece of furniture. But that evening stood apart because no shouts echoed, no objects crashed down, no outright barbs flew. Worse still, he just pulled up a chair opposite me in the eatery as I wrapped up plating the meal. He stared without a word, his stillness chilling me to the core. "I've cleared it with Mr. Dawson," he announced out of nowhere, slicing into his steak without glancing up. "All set. This place goes to me and you're heading to the home, willing or not." I held back. No breath, no drop of water from my eyes. I draped my cloth over my knees with my usual deliberate pace. Inside, something curled tight, like my spirit was withering under terror. Yet I stayed mute, for in that hush, I was forging a plan too. Sleep evaded me that night. I paced the corridor end to end. Darkness clawed at the partitions, as if the dwelling itself kept vigil. How had we arrived at this? I pondered when my child became the sort who could view his parent as mere bother. But pondering wouldn't cut it anymore. The following day, I picked up a habit long abandoned, scribbling. I grabbed a dusty journal and started logging timelines, identities, details, treating my existence like a dossier demanding inspection. The home's initial title sprang to mind, stashed in a secure case buried in my wardrobe's depths. And another memory surfaced. Nothing was inked by me yet, no handover complete. By law, this property remained under my hold. If he figured I'd surrender it like discarded cloth, he had me wrong, dead wrong. I began modestly. Off went some heirloom cutlery from my mom, followed by trinkets tucked away for ages, all on the down low, all without a hint of notice. Marcus figured I was still that yielding figure laundering his linens and plating his mornings without a peep. Wrong. No longer. The day prior to his lawyer meet, I caught his patio call. He had no clue I lingered by the drape, ear-tuned. Yep, locked in. The senior stays mum. She just whips up food and drifts about like a specter. Smooth sailing. Papers in 7 days, then I dive into the fixes. That kitchen gets a total overhaul. Tears didn't come, but those words. The senior, that's how he labeled me. Not mother, not the one who bore him, not the life giver, merely the senior. And in that very moment, I grasped it. No more delays. I needed to shield whatever scraps of self endured, the fragments he couldn't shatter. Dawn broke early for me next, straight to the vault. I set up a fresh ledger in another identity. Safeguards I'd never bothered with before. Updated codes, duplicated files in scattered spots, and pored over the property contract word for word, like unraveling a somber tale. And amid that scan, a overlooked bit emerged. A provision letting me void alterations if I showed force or mistreatment. I clutched that sheet like treasure. The degradations dragged on. Marcus never let up. Each day brought fresh tactics to belittle my felt insignificant. At times, he just brushed me off. On other occasions, he'd barge in carrying shopping sacks and slam them down on the counter like I was one of his staff. No conversation, only commands, only those sharp glares. One evening, with the air so heavy it seemed you could slice it, I prepared his go-to dish, those covered pork chops with rice, the same as back when he was little. In my remaining innocence, I figured one bite might stir a memory for him. Perhaps a joyful instant, a chuckle, an embrace from the era when he was just a kid with tiny fingers clutching at my dress for comfort. But nothing doing. He scooped up a bit, sampled it, and sneered, "It's tasteless, like you." I went rigid, not from the words themselves, but from the flatness in his voice. There was no fury left at all. It was pure, utter detachment, as though I'd vanished from his world. That's the moment I realized I couldn't endure this isolation any longer. My mind turned to one individual, the sole person who'd always greeted me warmly during chance meetings at the store, despite it being ages since we'd had a proper chat. Serena Hayes, the lady living a few doors away, who'd nursed her ailing mom right up to the end, who'd extended a hand to me repeatedly upon spotting me struggling with loads by myself. We weren't close confidants, but her warmth suggested that goodness hadn't entirely fled the earth. I sought her out. I headed to her place, pulse pounding in my chest. When she swung the door open, ponytail tied back and apron dusted with flour, I blurted, "I need someone to hear me out, and you're the only one I can think of." She welcomed me inside, no questions asked. I settled at her kitchen table, the scent of warm loaves filling the air, and poured out my soul. Every remark, every unseen wound, every quiet evening, every sign of scorn. Serena heard me through without a single interruption. She skipped the superficial reassurances. Instead, when I'd finished, she clasped my hand and uttered words that linger in my mind to this day. "You're not by yourself, and you shouldn't surrender your existence to anyone who sees no worth in it." That afternoon marked a turning point for me. I headed back home transformed. I no longer shuffled along with a stooped posture or drooping shoulders. It was like, after so many years, I'd finally outlined a strategy, a genuine one, all my own. Marcus picked up on the change. He eyed me suspiciously, brows knitting, yet he held his tongue. He merely scowled and returned to scrolling on his device. Me. I grinned inwardly, aware that his era was winding down while mine was dawning. True to her nature, Serena followed through. It wasn't a one-time ear. She started dropping by often, discreetly, sensing how a mere murmur here could explode like a bomb. She'd arrive bearing fresh-baked loaves. Other days, she'd simply join me on the porch, gazing at the drifting foliage. And gradually, she evolved into a steady ally, a bond that thrived on presence rather than chatter. Her quiet support was a balm in all that gloom. One day, as we brewed a pot of robust dark coffee side by side, she met my gaze with her calm steadiness and dropped a line that caught me off guard. "Thelma, should you choose to depart, I'll stand by you wherever you head. No need to clue me in on the timing. Just let me know you're making the move." I didn't reply right away. I merely observed the vapor curling up from the brew, as if it captured my swirling ideas. Deep down, though, a spark was kindling. For the first time, I sensed not just the possibility of breaking free, but of rebuilding from scratch. That evening, in my bedroom, I slid open the compartment holding my vital documents. I retrieved the property title and studied it intently. There it was, in bold print, Thelma Price. It belonged to me. The setup remained intact. I hadn't conceded a thing. Not so far, and I had no intention of starting. I set about collecting what I'd require for vanishing. Papers, a bit of cash withdrawn bit by bit to avoid notice, my certificate of birth, passbooks from the bank, an antique gold necklace passed down from my grandma. I stashed it all inside a vacant biscuit container, tucked beneath a hidden panel in the bureau. No soul would suspect. Meanwhile, I maintained the facade. I laid the table routinely, prepared meals without zeal yet flawlessly. Marcus appeared preoccupied, fixated on his phone conversations, his financial schemes, the upgrades he was already envisioning for a home that wasn't his possession. Yet I spotted a worrisome shift. He was monitoring me. He'd enter my space abruptly, claiming a search for a writing tool or inquiring about lost keys. He'd linger moments too long, as if scanning for clues. His gaze roamed the cabinets, the racks. He hunted for signs. He couldn't pinpoint what, but I sensed the scrutiny. That's why I grew extra vigilant. I committed to memory the spots for my belongings, snapped images with my outdated cell should anything get shifted. Precision ruled every action, every utterance. It was the Serena presented an option I hadn't thought of before. My relative resides close to Asheville in North Carolina, in a modest, serene spot where she avoids prying too much. Why not begin your stay there? I stayed quiet for a moment. The location echoed faintly in my thoughts. Asheville. It wasn't merely the town itself. It signified fresh air, a fresh start for Thelma. But how would I even reach it? I inquired gently. "I'll take you there myself," she responded promptly. That's the point when we settled on making the getaway exact, swift, leaving no room for slip-ups. The scheme started forming. On a Friday dawn, as Marcus headed to his routine session with Attorney Sterling, I'd exit through the rear entrance carrying just one bag and connect with Serena at the nearby intersection. She'd handle all the details, the vehicle, the path, the quiet. I focused on one aim, ensuring everything remained tidy prior to my departure. He'd discover the home unchanged, spotless, akin to a vacant legacy. Only the furnishings and the structure, devoid of anything more, since I'd gradually begun parting with the precious items, not the prominent pieces, not the evident ones, but those he'd overlook until their absence stung. I parted with the fine china service inherited from my mother, a set of vintage African-American sculptures, plus an oil canvas that had graced the corridor for 2 decades. Every transaction felt like a quiet parting, a fragment of the past released amid sorrow and relief. I stashed the cash and notes within a concealed seam in my handbag. Should things proceed smoothly, it'd sustain me for some time, independent of others, seeking no favors. Yet the weeks dragged on and Marcus grew increasingly edgy. One evening he remarked, "Have you visited the bank recently?" I shook my head steadily. "Why do you ask?" "Not sure. Something feels off. I just want to confirm you're not authorizing any documents behind my back." The twist was harsh. He, scheming to seize the property from me, fretted over my potential odd moves. "There's nothing for me to approve, Marcus. You realize I steer clear of such matters now," I fabricated. His stare bored into me, yet he dropped it. Then, merely 48 hours prior to my intended flight, an unforeseen snag arose. A slight mishap. While restoring the final documents to my secret compartment, a slip of paper tumbled down. Marcus entered right then and spotted it before I could retrieve it. He snatched it up. It documented the disposal of a vintage statue. My name wasn't listed, but the shipping details were. "What's this?" he demanded. "It's ancient." I came across it amid some clutter. "No importance," I answered, pulse racing wildly. He scrutinized me for moments stretching endlessly. Afterward, he placed the sheet on the counter and departed wordlessly. But that evening, he didn't return home. Serena contacted me the instant she learned of it. We're advancing the timeline. No chances to take. And that's what occurred. The day ahead of the scheduled escape, I gathered my belongings into a lone valise. I positioned a note beneath a floral holder on the dining surface. It wasn't affectionate. It stood as an assertion. I clarified that the residence belonged to me, that no transfers had been made, that he'd lost my consent and my quiet compliance. "All the damage you've wrought here," I penned, "won't be mended by fresh paint or beams, and with my exit, you'll grasp it at last. A mother's role surpasses any fortune." That closed my message. I didn't end with warmth, simply my signature, Thelma Price. As Serena arrived to collect me, tears didn't come. I shut the entrance decisively, no backward glance. The heavens loomed with heavy overcast, yet warmth like sunlight touched my flesh. Liberty. We rolled off in her automobile, no tunes playing. The journey stretched far, but after years the destination held no concern for me. I simply recognized I wouldn't circle back, and that the creature I'd nurtured would face existence solo. The vehicle crept along the rural lane, bordered by lofty woods rustling softly in the breeze. Serena gripped the wheel firmly with both palms, while I stared through the glass as though existence unfolded anew. The dwelling lay in the past. Marcus lay in the past, and so did that fractured self who'd withstood excess. We exchanged no words. At times, quietude requires no interruption. Mine brimmed with visions, unspoken retorts, suppressed sobs from long ago. Hers, I suspect, reflected the gravity of the burdens abandoned. Yet as we advanced toward the distant line, back in that pristine hollow I'd vacated like a discarded husk, Marcus pulled into the garage, unaware of any anomaly. He strode inside, chattering on his phone in that cutting tone reserved for sealing packs far from his claims. He traversed the parlor, oblivious to the arrangement or the missive concealed below. He drew a tumbler of liquid, tossed his footwear aside haphazardly, and collapsed onto the recliner. That's when it struck him. The quiet wasn't the everyday sort, the kind his mom usually kept from long, ingrained routine. No. This hush carried more weight, plunging deeper, like a hollow chamber resounding with emptiness. He rose and paced the rooms. He shouted my name a couple of times, then 3. No reply. Up the stairs he climbed, discovering the bedroom vacant, not disheveled or pillaged, just barren, as though the spirit had fled. He descended gradually, and as he passed the table, his eyes finally caught the note. He scanned it on his feet, forehead creased, initially puzzled, then furious, next incredulous, and at last wearing that expression guys get when they never expected to be left behind. He ripped the sheet apart, flung the pieces down, and booted the vase, sending it crashing into the wall. "You can't do this!" he bellowed into the void toward a woman who wasn't around anymore to listen. He rummaged the wardrobe, yanked open the cabinets, and realized items had vanished. Gems, documents, the files holding the property title, the packets of cash, all gone. For the first instance in his grown-up years, terror gripped him. Not dread over misplaced belongings, but alarm at slipping authority. He dialed my number once, again up to 20 attempts, each time the identical recording. "The line you've reached is currently unreachable." He reached out to his network. No one admitted knowledge, or perhaps no one would admit it. He even phoned Serena, whom he'd always dismissed as insignificant. She ignored the call, and that's when the true unraveling kicked in. For several days, he roamed the home like an enraged specter. In his head, he replayed the note with seething anger. He convinced himself I'd return, that it was just a fit of pique, that I couldn't survive without him, that I was far too aged to rebuild from scratch. Yet each solitary evening, each brew he had to prepare alone, each garment he spotted wrinkled. A nagging truth burrowed under his hide. This round, I wasn't returning. That's when the probing started. He visited the bank, reviewed the records, and spotted withdrawals. Modest amounts siphoned across multiple weeks. He'd overlooked them entirely. He'd always pegged me as inept. Never dreamed I could conceal a thing from him. He confronted Lawyer Dawson, pressing for details on any property-related actions. Dawson, shifting uneasily, revealed I'd obtained a verified duplicate of the deed. That's all. No endorsements, no transfers, zilch. So it's still under her ownership, he inquired, tone taut. Indeed, it remains in your mother's possession, and should you attempt to offload it absent her approval. Dawson arched a brow. You wouldn't be able. By law, you hold zero authority. That sealed it. Marcus grasped he hadn't merely forfeited me. He'd misjudged me entirely. He chatted with folks nearby, inquiring after possible allies, but silence met him everywhere. He even showed up at Serena's place and rapped on the entrance, yet no response came. He sensed she'd been absent a few days, too. That fueled his fury further. He turned to liquor, not in explosive outbursts or cinematic flair. Quietly, he nursed it. Planted before the screen flickering on stations he barely registered. Bottles drained wordlessly, meals tasted bland, existence lacked direction. And amid that chasm, he eyed the dwelling anew. Once his prize, his premature legacy, it now felt like confinement, barriers echoing his ignorance of laundry, meal prep, or dozing off sans someone muting the set. One dawn, he stirred to a lounge blanketed in grime. He noted the fridge bare, coffee supplies depleted, the lavatory reeking musty, and suddenly sobs overtook him. Not a juvenile wail or boisterous outburst. It was a subdued, nearly embarrassed sob, a muffled keen through gritted jaws. For the initial time, he confronted an emotion he'd never anticipated: desertion. And therein lay the true retribution. Not the documents, not the funds, not the missive, but the void. My void. That maternal figure perpetually present, even amid his unworthiness of companionship, the one who'd weathered disdain, masked as banter, directives cloaked as counsel, detachment feigned as concern. I hadn't forsaken the abode, I'd shed the burden. I'd released my tormentor, and that left him gutted, since regardless of his outbursts, his wrath, his vengeful pursuits, he couldn't compel my return. And each dusk, as he secured the place in darkness, with the TV murmuring to empty air, he pieced together more of the closing line from my note. A mother's company outshines any wealth, and that company was his no longer. We pulled into the village outskirts as the heavens flushed with rich amber hues. It lacked scenic allure or quaint appeal, simply serene, hushed, sufficient for a shattered soul like mine to rediscover how to inhale freely. Serena killed the engine and regarded me with her signature gaze, blending compassion and resolve. She uttered no words. She granted me space to absorb it all. I stepped out gradually. My limbs trembled, not from frailty, but because each move forward felt like a deliberate choice. Every stride marked a defiance of decades trapped in emotional chains. I entered the modest single-story rental we'd secured from afar. It lacked extravagance, yet it was free of lingering shadows. That's precisely what I craved. The interior carried the aroma of aged timber and fresh scrubbing. Curtains were drawn back, allowing the breeze's soft whispers to drift in. My feet touched the planks as if claiming stable earth after a storm-tossed voyage. I sank into the lone seat in the eating area and released a quiet, startling guffaw that bordered on mania. Serena handed me a cup of water. She settled opposite, remarking, "You've made it," as though I'd claimed a gold medal. And truly, I had. "Indeed," I affirmed. "I'm present." Sleep evaded me that evening, not from unease but from my frame's bewilderment at such profound quietude. No pacing echoes in the corridor, no veiled barbs in notes, no accusing glares, just the darkness and myself. That marked my inaugural restless evening of liberty. The ensuing weeks stumbled along awkwardly. Adapting to existence minus dread demands patience. On initial outings to the local store, I scanned faces warily, suspecting threats hidden beneath. Grinning proved challenging, not from reluctance, but from muscles long unused to genuine spark from within. Serena offered steady support. She joined my ventures when needed, yet respected my boundaries. At times, she'd prepare meals unbidden. On others, she'd quietly peruse a book as I gazed blankly at the plaster, thoughts adrift. Gradually, mornings filled with the scent of brewing java. The greenery she'd fetched from the garden center began to flourish. One day, a local named Martha rapped at the entrance bearing warm loaves straight from her oven. I managed a tentative grin, unsure if kindness hid peril, but Serena gave my elbow a reassuring press, whispering that I'd emerged from the depths. In the midst of tending the containers on the veranda one midday, I caught myself murmuring a melody. The tune escaped me, yet it felt personal. My thoughts hummed it unbidden. In that moment, I sensed a fragment of my essence resurfacing. Not joy, precisely, more like awareness. For the initial instance, I inhabited my days fully. Still, shadows lingered. Dreams where Marcus berated me harshly, recollections of crockery splintered across the tiles, or stretches of utter quiet because he'd misplaced his set of keys and blamed the void on me. The occasion he snapped, "You're nothing but a weight, Ma. Without my help, you'd be homeless." Such barbs cling fiercely. They pierce like unseen barbs beneath the flesh. Nevertheless, upon jolting awake from those terrors, Serena awaited, perhaps with a steaming mug of herbal brew or merely her calm company. She never pressed me to heal swiftly. She merely permitted my fractures to exist without complication. One midday, I ventured solo to the hillside vantage in the village. Dawn had barely broken. Sunlight edged over the horizon, and the atmosphere held that invigorating tang of damp soil that always stirred my vitality. I ascended leisurely. With each footfall, I registered every sinew, every inhalation, as if reconstructing my form anew. At the summit, the vista unfolded through renewed perspective. Thelma Price had shed the shell of a woman begging leave to merely be. She had resolved to vanish from a place devoid of warmth. No second thoughts assailed me. I pondered parting with the property, channeling those funds toward wanderings, serene coexistence alongside Serena, reclaiming the seasons he'd withheld. And I would pursue it, for it belonged to me utterly. Because at last, my physique, my choices, my bonds, all were unequivocally my own. Just then, a fierce gust swept by, as if existence murmured approval. "You're precisely situated as required." This wasn't retribution, nor retribution exacted. It embodied restorative equity for the spirit. Marcus might grasp, should he choose, that a parent's devotion isn't boundless, that trampling a soul precludes its endless pulse in your favor. Mine no longer throbbed for him. It resonated for myself. Marcus couldn't pinpoint when the residence ceased feeling like his domain. Initially, he dismissed it as fleeting. He convinced himself of my exaggeration, that a cooling-off period would suffice, that I'd reappear once my whimsy faded. Yet as time stretched without my return, the hush amplified in every nook. It transcended mere void. It became a verdict. The galley stirred chilly each dawn. No Java's perfume wafted. Blinds remained shut. Grime accumulated like an uninvited fixture, assured of permanence. Devoid of my essence, the space turned alien to him. And that baffled Marcus utterly, for he'd always viewed me as functional apparatus, an appendage to the structure, a compliant force that catered unquestioningly. He failed to see that the dwelling's vitality stemmed from me, and in departing, I'd carried it away. Serena observed my morning rituals wordlessly. She recognized the internal realignment underway. We seldom delved into Marcus, yet we shared an unspoken awareness. He started pursuing traces of my whereabouts. It came via unanswered voicemails, texts I ignored, and whispers that filtered back to me faintly. He'd visited the bank, the lawyer's office, and even a far-off relative's place, desperate for any clue about my location. Yet I stayed hidden, not from terror, but from self-respect. One ordinary afternoon, strolling with Serena amid the neighborhood stalls, I spotted a potted plant I'd long admired, a twisting vine with robust emerald foliage. I purchased it on impulse. Back at the apartment, I set it on a windowsill where morning light would caress it. To my own astonishment, I murmured to it while positioning it just so. "You'll thrive here." And so will I. That evening, sleep brought visions of Marcus. But this wasn't the domineering brute who bellowed that I was destroying it all. Instead, he appeared as a boy. Weeping in a barren room amid shattered playthings, he pleaded to know why I'd abandoned him. I awoke blending remorse with freedom, realizing that while I'd isolated him, he'd done the same to me for countless years. Time marched on, bringing fresh reports of his decline. A shared friend, the spouse of a nearby resident who hadn't cut ties, shared that Marcus had quit his job, barricading himself indoors, irritable and snapping at folks over the phone if my name arose, that he'd taken up liquor, and that one day they discovered him passed out on the sofa amid empty bottles, the TV blaring a culinary program, the very one I'd tuned into daily. His pride was fracturing. Lacking me, he had nobody to fault for his anger, no target to press for fixes, no person to belittle for an ego boost. At last, he faced living within his own skin, utterly unprepared. Then arrived a note scrawled by hand, no sender's details, but the script was unmistakable. His. A fumbling stab at remorse laced with pleas and deceit, masked as worry. He wrote lines such as, "I can't fathom why you'd handle it like this. We could have discussed things. I'm hurting as well." Nowhere did it admit, "I abused you, I dismissed you, I wounded you." Zero sign of real self-examination, merely a string of words crafted to pull me circling back into his world. I shredded the paper into fragments. I set it ablaze in the basin and observed the cinders fade into nothing. For the first time in ages, genuine ease washed over me. I required neither his validation nor his pardon. His hold on me was broken, words included. In the meantime, the property transaction advanced. The agent, a gentle fellow in his 50s, queried repeatedly whether I was certain about parting with such a worthwhile asset, suggesting I lease it or return one day. But each consideration summoned one vivid scene. Myself cowering in a nook, enduring Marcus's roars as he smashed dishes and declared no one resided without cost. That dwelling was no sanctuary anymore. It was an injury under shelter. I chose to let it go. I finalized it matter-of-factly, merely inking the documents and directing the funds to a fresh account solely under my control. Serena joined me at the financial institution. She offered no words, yet gripped my hand in the queue. That quiet act bolstered me more than endless orations. With the proceeds, I envisioned no new residence. Material things held no appeal. I aimed to exist fully, exploring dreamed-of destinations I'd never reached. Perhaps Italy or Oaxaca. I yearned to master dancing, to glide through water unafraid, to chuckle freely, sans seeking consent. Most of all, I desired Marcus to learn I'd offloaded it all. That zilch remained, that the home he assumed he'd claim now graced another household, every slab of flooring, portal, and furnishing beyond his grasp since he'd neglected them, figuring entitlement sufficed. Word came that upon hearing, he lost control, racing to the site to halt proceedings, only to find it vacant. Fresh inhabitants had recoated the surfaces, discarded the dated pieces. No remnant of my existence lingered, and there he stood in the garden's heart, bellowing my name like a furious youngster robbed of his plaything. He rang my line, but I'd switched it already. He sent messages that bounced undelivered. He hunted me like one chases a specter, for that's my essence to him now, a wraith departed, vanishing the very breath alongside. One night, Serena whipped up a feast in my honor. Shrimp simmered with cornmeal, fresh-baked loaves, and a dessert vintage. We raised glasses to bygones, to burdens I'd shed forever, to freedoms I'd claimed at last. As she chattered that twilight about launching a modest stitching studio, it struck me that not all fractures need sting. Certain fissures invite the glow. Marcus would persist in the chase, not from affection, but it was because he had no idea how to exist without someone under his thumb. And I refused to play that role for anybody anymore. Never had the breeze felt so refreshing as it did that morning in Savannah, Georgia. I awoke gently, free from the tightness in my chest that had shadowed me for years. For the first time in ages, no demands echoed in my mind, no thudding steps approached from the corridor. I had no dread about facing the day. I flung open the window, allowing the sunlight to graze my skin. It was gentle, nearly comforting, like a fresh touch. I inhaled deeply. Perched on the bed's edge, I realized at last that a fresh chapter had started, one that was truly mine. Serena had headed to the market at dawn. She'd scribbled a message in blue ink on the table. Today, I'm fetching buttermilk biscuits and strong coffee. Promise. A smile crossed my lips. Not for the baked goods or the brew. I smiled because someone had considered me with genuine warmth, and after years of quiet commands and ultimatums, that meant more than gold. Time unfolded leisurely, the way it should during recovery. I grew accustomed to strolling at an unhurried pace, pausing before trees, gazing at the clouds without glancing at my watch. Serena guided me back to swimming, not in the ocean, but through existence itself. She encouraged my siestas, played tunes from her younger days. We prepared meals side by side and occasionally shed tears, but the sort that purified rather than overwhelmed. Challenges arose, of course. I uncovered fractured pieces within myself that had stayed hidden. At times, I'd gaze blankly at a wall, lost in recollections of pain, like persistent splinters that refused to fade. Other moments, I'd stir from sleep murmuring Marcus's name, unsure if it stemmed from anger, sorrow, or mere routine. That's the nature of it. The heart doesn't reset in a single night, yet I no longer feared those echoes. I'd acquired something more powerful than terror, the conviction that I'd chosen my own path. Eventually, during a stroll by the riverfront park, Serena inquired if I longed for the old home. I pondered deeply. I missed the version of myself from those days, the resilient survivor who scraped by to provide it all, but the structure itself. No, I'd sold it without a backward glance, recognizing that mortar and stone can't outweigh serenity. And that rang true. No regrets lingered. Freedom had arrived. Marcus reached out once again. I ignored the call. He left a message. His voice carried a chill masked as politeness. "Mother, we need to discuss this. Some matters remain unresolved." I offered no reply because, in fact, clarity reigned supreme. He sought details on my remaining funds. He aimed to confirm he hadn't been entirely cut from the estate. He yearned to reclaim some hold. But I wasn't the fragile woman who'd once wept at his nursing home threats. Now I rested with windows unlocked, moved forward without hesitation. And with each coffee shared with Serena on the porch, each gust tousling my silver strands, I sensed I was precisely where I belonged. As dusk fell one evening, I penned a note, not for delivery, but for my own release. "Marcus, you didn't enter the world as cruel. You entered as my child?" And that wounded me deepest, for I once trusted you'd cherish me with the fierce devotion I gave in shielding you. But it never came. You regarded me as worn-out decor. You viewed me as a liability. You plotted to confine me. You addressed me with disdain, yet severing ties proved agonizing. Still, I managed it. We owe each other nothing. My true obligation was to myself, and I've settled that account. Spare no thought for the will. It's all settled. You'll inherit zilch. Yet I grant you a heavier gift than wealth. The quiet farewell of a mother departing without bitterness, but also without return. May you recall this if fate ever rattles you fiercely. No fortune can substitute for a mother's presence. I'm gone and I won't come back. Thelma. I folded the note into a container and interred it beside the garden of the home Serena and I shared. Not for concealment, but as one lays to rest a past no longer desired. In the ensuing months, I connected with fresh faces, women who'd escaped comparable ordeals, women who'd mastered the word no, later than ideal. We convened over tea, ambled by the water, and exchanged confidences like trusted friends. We chuckled, we wept, and most vitally, we bolstered one another. One such woman, Estelle, remarked to me one afternoon, "Thelma, you're courageous." I chuckled. "No, Estelle, I'm simply weary of fading away." She spoke wisely. I didn't amass fortune or acclaim. I didn't launch charities. I didn't author volumes. I achieved nothing flashy beyond the toughest feat, existing free of remorse. I discovered solo dancing, unhurried meals, mirror gazes without critique, faith in my inner dialogue, and restful nights with a serene spirit. And at this stage in life, that's nothing short of uprising. I stopped pondering alternate scenarios where Marcus might have valued me otherwise, since I grasped that affection, when pleaded for, becomes home, turns into a jail. Right now, I step with ease. Right now, fear doesn't grip me. Right now, I realize I once gave life as a mom, yet I'm a female too. Most importantly, I'm liberated. One time, circumstances cornered me into picking between the institution and submission. Silently, I picked quiet, followed by vitality. I let go of it all, not out of spite, but to show him and me that a parent's nearness outweighs all wealth. Should he catch wind of me again, may it recall not my sacrifices, but what I'd refused to surrender. Thelma Price, female, parent, and finally master of her own path. Enjoyed hearing my tale. If you stuck around to the finish, leave a 1 below. Loved it. Show support with a like on the video and a little donation. My channel's packed with similar real-life accounts, so hit subscribe and dive in. I've pinned 2 fresh ones on display that folks rave about. Appreciate you tuning in. Catch you next time for